Let's take a look back at the real best teams in Europe each season. Each season since 04-05 that is, of course, as done via this criteria. Let's roll on. 2005, Champions of Europe, Liverpool. Best team in Europe, Chelsea. Yes, I know. I'm sure most of you who have looked back and or do remember would probably have expected me to name the AC Milan team who lost that final with Istanbul as the best team in Europe that year. But no. You see, that side peaked sometime in the previous 2 years during their UCL/league triumphs. In 04-05 though, there was no looking past Jose's Blues, setting a new record for the most number of points tallied in the league, conceding only 15 goals in the entire season in the league, adding a League Cup to the collection, and only even bowing out in the Champions League due to very controversial circumstances. If you know, you know. 2006, Champions of Europe, Barcelona. Best team in Europe, Barcelona. As the Indians say, according to me, the most underrated Barca side to win the UCL. Cause yes, while the attack of Eto'o, Juli, Ronaldinho, Messi, Larsen is pretty easy to appreciate, these guys were a pretty solid unit defensively too, led by the legendary Carles Puyol. Barca that season kept 8 clean sheets in Europe, on the way disposing of some serious competitions like Milan, Chelsea and Arsenal, and even won La Liga with a 12-point gap during a time that was not easy to do. 2007, Champions of Europe, AC Milan. Best team in Europe, Manchester United. So because this is probably my favourite year ever since I began watching football, I've spoken about both these teams quite a bit in the past. So, if you wish to know a bit more about the AC Milan team that won the Champions League that season, check this out. A team of Maldini, Nesta, Cafu, Gattuso, Pirlo, Seedorf, Inzaghi and Kaká were by my estimation one of the worst teams to win the Champions League during my football fandom lifetime. Why so? Because it was no longer 2003. This was in fact 2007, by the time which the legs of the core of that great Milan side were pretty much gone, and what were once upon a time a force to be reckoned with in both the domestic and European circuit were now a side who just won 50% of the Serie A games, just managing a top 4 finish, struggling to top a fairly easy UCL group, and barely scraping past Celtic in the second round. So how did they end up winning the Champions League in the end? Simple, the brilliance of Ricky Kaká, who himself, while being pretty average domestically, in the Champions League was damn near unstoppable that season, and his exploits not only took Milan to glory, but also in the long term resulted them in being remembered as not a fairly mediocre side who were limping for most parts of an underwhelming campaign by European giants who dominated game to game, and with all due respect, wrongly so. And if you wish to know about the Manchester United team that they knocked out in the semi-final that season, check this out. Manchester United 06-07 were better than Manchester United 07-08, but again, for very small margins. The 08 side is still celebrated and the 07 side is more or less forgotten in comparison. But do not let those small margins distract you from seeing the bigger picture, people, because facts are, where the 08 side were heavily reliant on the brilliance of Cristiano Ronaldo, the 07 side could break you apart from various angles. Where the 08 side were taken down to a final day penalty to win the league by Avram Grant's Chelsea, the 07 United side dominated the league and won it with 2 games to spare against Jose Mourinho's Chelsea. Where the 08 United side bowed out in the 6th round of the FA Cup to Portsmouth, the 07 United side made it to the final and were only hard done by an extra time by a questionable decision in the form of a disallowed goal. Where United 08 had fairly hard fought encounters against Roma in the quarter-final, United 07 destroyed Roma in the quarter-final. Now, in case you were wondering what the specific differences were between the two teams, well, basically the 06-07 team was before Carlos Tevez joined, meaning United was still basically a solid 4-4-2, with the front two being Wayne Rooney and Louis Saha. And man, I'm telling you, this brother himself is super underrated. Like, honestly, he may have actually complimented Waza better than Tevez did. And yes, while CR7 was still the side's best player in the best season of his career as a pure midfielder, this was far from a pass to Ronaldo with Inshallah show. These men were legit a devastating unit from top to bottom. 2008, Champions of Europe, Manchester United. Best team in Europe, Manchester United. They may not have been as fluid and controlled game to game as the previous year, but there's no doubt that this is the United team that most people look back on as being the best. The reason? This guy. This was the first season Cristiano Ronaldo showed that he had the potential to be one of the game's true greats, firing 42 times from midfield, breaking record after record along the way, and in turn etching his name into United folklore. 2009, Champions of Europe, Barcelona. Best team in Europe, Barcelona. This team is what many people wrongly think the Barca 2011 side was, with an incredible and damn near perfect mix of young and up-and-coming youth graduates and experienced senior group. Pep Guardiola really struck gold in his inaugural season in charge of the Barca first team. They had little competition in La Liga, even less competition in the Copa del Rey, and outside the one chaotic night in West London, ruled Europe too, on top of it all. 2010, Champions of Europe, Inter Milan. Best team in Europe, Inter Milan. This was actually a lot closer than you'd probably think, because no lie, I was close to giving this to the Barca team that amassed 99 points in the league and only exited the UCL via a Mourinho masterstroke in a proper scrappy game. But nah, because speaking of the devil himself, you can't overlook a treble at the end of the day. They went all the way and they did it Jose's way. And if you're unsure about what that exactly means, the aforementioned knockout tie versus Barcelona that season is as good of an example as you're likely to see. 2011, Champions of Europe, Barcelona. Best team in Europe, Barcelona. Yeah, no real competition here either, to be fair. Barca in 2011, while not as solid or as complete as 09, had a midfield trio that were more established and mature by now, two wide forwards that did a lot more for Messi, and fielded Messi in the very first season he began getting genuine shouts of being the best ever. Hard to beat that combo, and very few did. 2012, Champions of Europe, Chelsea. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. Okay, so everyone by now knows the fluky nature of Chelsea's UCL win that season, and while they actually did have a better season than most people give them credit for, watch this video, the true force in Europe that year without a doubt was Jose's Centurions. With possibly the greatest physical specimen to ever play the sport at its physical peak, this side unsurprisingly were all about physicality. They were rough and solid at the back, demonic on the counter, and lethal up front, tallying 100 points in the league, achieving a 100% record in the UCL group stages, and only even going out in the lottery of penalties. 2013, Champions of Europe, Bayern Munich. Best team in Europe, Bayern Munich. The greatest German club side in recent memory, the Bayern side of 12-13 put to rest their demons of a treble of second place finishes the previous year by clinching the treble that year, winning Bundesliga by a mental 25 points and making light work of a UCL knockout route that consisted of Arsenal, Juve, and Barcelona, the latter of whom they famously embarrassed 7-0 over two legs. And just like that, a meme is born. 2014, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. The greatest single season UCL side we've probably ever seen, Mr. Ancelotti's first Real side were the quintessential attacking cup team, because with the attacking quartet of Benzema, Bale, Di Maria and Ronaldo running for them at every break, all they needed to do was keep their defensive shape and let those guys do the damage. And do the damage, they damn sure did. 2015, Champions of Europe, Barcelona. Best team in Europe, Barcelona. Though they weren't anywhere near the 2009 or 2011 Barca sides when it comes to midfield dominance, Barca's 2015 treble winners were a lot more explosive and therefore a much bigger threat on the break. And no surprise, this was mainly due to the formation of MSN after Messi moved back out to the right for good sometime January-February. And boy, whenever these three were in sync like they were in games against PSG, Bayern and Juve, there was very little the opposition could do outside look on. 2016, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. If I made this claim sometime during early November that season where Real were amidst the depressing, dire and downright downcast duration of defensive drills and defunct diplomacy under Rafa Benitez, you'd have thought that I was crazy. But thanks to a 2-2 draw away at Gary Neville's Valencia that January, Rafa was out and Zizou was in. And once the living legend found his ideal midfield trio with Casemiro as the anchor in late March, early April, they were truly on their way. And on their way for quite a few years. Case in point. 2017, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. Starting very much where they left off, these guys from the get-go were a dominant force across Europe. And add to that Zizou striking diamond in the form of his 4-4-2 diamond following Bale's lengthy layoff, all bets were off. Mr. Champions League for a reason. 2018, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Manchester City. This season, if nothing else, proved that there is such a thing as habit of winning, because that's all it was, as Real Madrid struggled domestically throughout the season and yes, still won the European Cup fairly unfazed, albeit mostly on one man's back. That makes them winners, but it doesn't make them the best team, because that would be these guys. The first ever team to tally 100 Premier League points. City were damaging sides in Europe too and looked destined for the final until Pep came across that one man who seemed to have his number more often than most. Maybe next year, mate. For him, that is. 2019, Champions of Europe, Liverpool. Best team in Europe, Manchester City. The second season in a row where these men dominated England, dominated the UCL group, almost put up a cricket score in the second round, only to bow out to domestic rivals and eventual runner-ups in the quarter-finals. Well, what do you know? Seems like the habit of losing is also a thing. But yeah, as for the winners that season in Liverpool, well, check this out. So fun fact, in the 18-19 season, despite having about 3 times the amount of games in the Premier League when compared to the Champions League, Liverpool still managed to lose 4 times the amount of games in the Champions League when compared to the Premier League. And yet, they won the Champions League and finished second in the Premier League. You with me on that? Good. And while the trophy is what ultimately counts, their record game to game does go a long way to explain why that, while they may be the greatest runners-up in Premier League history, they were quite a distance away from being the greatest winners in Champions League history. Either way though, very good team, corner taken quickly Origi, etc. 2020, Champions of Europe, Bayern Munich. Best team in Europe, Bayern Munich. An incredible side led by a scary attack, led by arguably the greatest striker of his generation in his prime. Simply put, what'd you expect? If your answer was a treble with 100 goals in the league and 43 in Europe, then you, my friend, clearly use Google. 2021, Champions of Europe, Chelsea. Best team in Europe, Manchester City. And yet another season where City ruled England until the end and ruled Europe until they didn't, bowing out to domestic rivals when it was all said and done. But you know what? It turns out they weren't the only creatures of habit floating about that year, because yes, just like they did so with the caretaker manager who took charge in the middle of the season a decade earlier, Thomas Tuchel followed the footsteps of Roberto Di Matteo before him, brought the European Cup to Chelsea, sending the fans to holiday very excited for the following season, only to do f***all in the end. Rinse repeat. 2022, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. You may question my choice of Real due to their dubious run in Europe that season that saw them not only get handed defeat by Woody and the gang in the first night, but let's be fair, stare at the brink of elimination multiple times during the knockouts. However, number one, they actually also won La Liga by a landslide that year, people forget that, and two, like I said yesterday, it's not luck if it keeps happening. These guys know how to win, these guys know how to get it done. 2023, Champions of Europe, Manchester City. Best team in Europe, Manchester City. Hallelujah. They finally did it. And listen, as great as they were in the previous season, anyone who watched them closely would tell you that they were a genuine number 9 away from real greatness. And well, best believe point was taken, with Haaland's 52 goals in all competitions helping City to become the second English team to three-peat the league, as well as the second English team to clinch the treble. 2024, Champions of Europe, Real Madrid. Best team in Europe, Real Madrid. Another year where they strolled to the league with very little competition, and yet another year they lifted the European Cup the hard way. Narrow wins, extra time exploits, last minute mayhem, and a final that seemed to be slipping away until it didn't. I keep telling you, it's not luck if it keeps happening. These guys are what they are for a reason. These guys rule Europe for a reason. They're simply the best. They're simply Real Madrid. And that is that. Agree or disagree beats indifference. Once again, don't forget to like, comment and share. And of course, subscribe. Till next time, you keep rolling.